Stream is just starting up. Today we're going to be doing a critique. But first, how's everyone doing? We're still in a shutdown in most of the world. Want to check in on everyone and let the delay catch up. So today we're going to be doing a critique. Lyrictenor sent in some work. He's been supporting me on Patreon for a while. We've corresponded a little bit. I'm really excited to do this. I haven't really looked at the work. I wanted to look at it for the first time along with you guys. I didn't want to prepare. I just want to give you guys my feedback as it comes rather than like planning anything out. When it comes to critiques, I don't think there is a standard for how they should be done. There's a few things that, of course, I think we can all agree upon. But I'm going to do them the way I do them with my students when I'm teaching in person. And for me, critiques aren't about me. Critiques should not be about what I would have done, how it would be perfect if, where you add these magical scenarios. Opinions should be designated as an opinion. I try to make it really clear when I have an opinion versus what I would say is a fact. So technical stuff I can talk about factually, but if I have an opinion and I do feel like I want to express it, I express it with the disclaimer that it is an opinion. I also like to make sure that I check my own self when I'm teaching in person. I always ask my students, hey guys, does this make sense to you? Do you agree? And we'll even vote. I'll put a comparison of before and afters or one crop versus another crop, for example. And we will all give our input. That way it doesn't become like just an opinion, just my opinion. I try to check my own ego, We'll start in a couple of minutes once everyone is here. I've really been enjoying doing these every day. It gives me something to look forward to. I enjoy interacting with you guys, especially when there's a lot of engagement. It's really fun for me. And even though I'm not exactly making money on these, I feel like I achieved something in the day. It's a good way to start my day. We're just looking at some footage of some traveling I've done. Here we're at Salvation Mountain. Salvation Mountain's a pretty interesting place. If you're not familiar with it, I guess it's in Niland, California. It's right outside of Slab City, which used to be, I believe, a military base. And now it's become a place for people really just wanting to live off the grid. Or maybe they have no choice. I think a lot of people choose it. It got its first little claim to fame in Into the Wild, which is a movie I love. And you actually see the creator of Salvation Mountain, which is a giant, we can call it like a folk art installation. You'll see it. I hope in my footage I have a shot of it. But this man, Leonard Knight, built this entire mountain over the course of like 30 plus years. And he lived on the property, he didn't own it. And he would give tours, and anyone that came he would talk to. And I wanted to see it for a very long time. When I was out in the desert, I didn't want to see what everyone else saw. And so I asked for where the real stuff was, Where can I go see something no one else has seen? And that's how I discovered it. I met the creator. I got to know him really well. I talked to him for like a couple of hours maybe. And then things changed. Instagram came out. And now if you go to Salvation Mountain, there it is in the shot, you're going to see a lot more people, drones, selfies, that kind of thing. So this is footage from when I visited again. I mean, here I am with my own camera. But yeah. All right, let's get started. I'm going to pull up the work. All right, so we're in Lightroom. Lyric Tenor, are you with us? Let us know. We're looking at your work. I want to make sure you're in the chat before we get started. So usually on these I'm talking about my own work, so I'm excited to talk about someone else's work for a change. So these are highlights. I've gone ahead and downloaded them all from his website. And what we're going to be looking at today are highlight photos. Like, it looks like I can actually see in the metadata that they're all his 5-star photos. So we're going to look at his best. And luckily, off the bat, I would say it's a good collection of images. That if he only delivered his best, I would say he did a good job. The client would be very happy, is my take. All right, good morning. All right, let's pull up Lightroom and let's get started. So stop me at any point if you have a specific question for me. Also, I do want to open it up to other people. If you guys have input, please share it. I think, like I said, I don't want it to just be about me. Yes, I do critiques for a living as a teacher. And yes, I have done professional photography for a very long time. But no one is the end-all, be-all when it comes to their opinions, advice, critiques. So right off the bat, we have some good detail shots. I can see right here. I'm just going to kind of scroll through it. I think here, perhaps, so I don't want to spoil. I did look ahead a tiny bit, and I did see a few trends, a few things I noticed that you do have a habit of. And one is you crop a little high, meaning you give a lot of headspace at the top, which isn't a huge deal for like this kind of shot, but we're going to see when we have groups of people. I did notice you are cropping a bit high. I'll point it out when we get to it. I asked if there were any specific things you wanted me to talk about, and Lyric Tenor said color balance issues. Maybe type them out again as a reminder if you don't mind, but color balance issues, mixed lighting, which is something we talked about a lot in the last critique or the review of my own work. So what I'm seeing here, it has a very green tint. So different light sources have different color casting. The human eye blends them all together. We kind of neutralize the color cast for the most part. Tungsten light still looks orange. Fluorescent light still has a green tint. Daylight is still pretty cool. However, the camera cannot color balance for multiple light sources. The camera has to pick one light source. And so when the camera picks tungsten light, let's say you're in a room lit by tungsten lights somehow. I mean, they're not very common anymore. But if you're in a room filled with tungsten light, the daylight from the outside will appear incredibly blue, and vice versa. If you're color balanced for daylight, tungsten light would look incredibly orange. Fluorescent light would look incredibly green tinted. Okay, so I really like this shot. I think you have an authentic stillness to it. It doesn't feel phony or fake. I'm wondering how long you were on this image before you were able to get that shot. It does look like it could have been a quick shot, but it could have also been an image in which you sat with her and waited for the right expression. Typically, I have some intuition into that. I'm not entirely sure. So here's one thing I don't want to talk too much about. Like, 1997. Is that an issue? In the perfect world, would that be there? No. But guys, this is an event. You're photographing something live. You're often not having the opportunity to move things around. But one thing I do when I do things like table shots, I will remove the centerpiece to get it out of the way if I have a moment. It depends on the type of shot. If I saw this woman sitting alone and I saw a moment I wanted to capture, a stillness that I see here, I perhaps wouldn't go and say, hey, let me move this real quick, I want a shot of you. I would probably try to just grab that shot. As an event photographer, my main objective is capturing authentic moments, and I am not interested in moving things around or manipulating my environment heavily. I go for the most perfect compositions I can given the circumstance. That's why I showed you guys not just my 5-star photos where everything aligned. Sometimes there's a moment you're not going to capture with like immaculate composition, and that's okay. And sometimes you don't want immaculate composition. Sometimes you want to shoot a bit looser in order to get a more natural, raw feeling. Okay, so here we have, I think, some color issues. This would have been pretty easy to fix. I don't know how you color balanced. Let me know in the chat box. But JPEGs are going to be tougher. I'm going to do a little bit of Lightroom teaching too. I will repeat a lot of what I do. I will vocalize it because you guys can't see the tabs. This is how I teach my students Lightroom. I never sit down and teach them. I actually just critique and vocalize everything I do. So I'll say, okay, so what I'm going to do is hit G to go to the library, etc. I'll say I'm going to hit D to go to develop, and through that repetition they learn. So one of the easiest way to color balance is using the little eyedropper on the right tab. And then you guys can see on the screen, you can click on a neutral area. It's not, I believe it's not supposed to be white. It's supposed to be a neutral gray, but something that shouldn't have a color cast. With JPEGs, it doesn't work quite as well. I believe it's designed for RAW, but we can try it. And so with one click, we can start to get a more accurate color balance. And then from there, you can tweak the temperature and the tint a bit more. I hit Y for before and after. Now I kind of like the cast a bit on the left. It actually has a warmer look to it. I want to make sure it's displaying correctly. So I'm going to wait for the lag to catch up. And it looks like Lightroom might not display that correctly when I'm streaming. I'm still figuring out the streaming, but yeah, it's not going to display the side by side I pulled up. But you can at least neutralize it and then maybe add a little bit of a tint and pull it back a bit as an option. Usually if I'm photographing a sign and I am going to use I'm going to shoot pretty wide open, I'll usually aim for toward the frontwards rather than like the middle or the back. Here we have, oh, it looks like now that I'm looking at my second monitor, it did pull up properly the side by side. Good to know. But yeah, I would typically focus on homecoming. Ideally, you're going to focus on everything. We don't always need completely blurred out backgrounds or to shoot so wide open. That said, I make the same mistake, so take that criticism for what it's worth. Now, we do have a weird, in my take, and you guys can maybe give some input. The color does look a little off here. Now, it's interesting because I can tell based off the files what kind, like I know you're not shooting Canon. I actually did peek. It was Nikon, but I knew it could be Nikon or Sony. You could just tell they do render color a little bit differently. But in this image, it does look a little bit off, and I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. We also have a really, like a hot spot, and again, I'm not entirely sure why we have a hot spot here. It looks like our light source is coming from here. It looks like it's a somewhat overcast day. Let me know if I'm correct here. Thanks, Linda. There's a delay, so now I'm seeing that you're saying there is a side-by-side. Yeah, this is still a little bit wonky using the whole streaming software for me. Let's keep going and take a look. Lyric Tenor had another question about shooting in harsh light. So here, what I'm seeing, it looks like you were shooting in, I believe it was hang on, I'm getting a phone call, sorry guys. I believe it was an overcast day. But you have to remember, overcast days, they don't necessarily have, like, it can, when you have an overcast day, you can, if it's kind of in between, you can still get really harsh lighting. It depends on how even that overcast look is. I have to wait for my phone call to stop. Sorry. Okay, so here, if we want to be exact and perfect with our technique, and I mentioned some extra headroom that I noticed in a lot of your work, only glancing, not really looking deep. A more traditional crop, and I think maybe you decided to kind of split the difference. I think I personally would have gone for a third way, 1/3 of my framing to be at the eye line of the two girls on the sides, and then had her a little bit higher. That's what I think I would have gone for. But in any case, if you guys look, you do have a little bit more shoulder room on the left. Or I'm sorry, yeah, on the left we have more room, and I would have cropped in. Now here's something a lot of people aren't going to tell you. Imagine your client is going to make prints, and let's say you are using a website like SmugMug, in which you're able to allow your client to order prints online. A lot of people do like 8x10. 8x10 is still a thing, and what happens is if I go to an 8x10 cropping, you guys will see the very thin shoulder space here, right? And that can be an issue. So one thing to be sure of is you did a good job here, but you always want enough space on the sides, not just for the camera's crop, its aspect ratio, but also for the crop that an 8x10 might produce. So back to the image at full crop, I would probably bring it in, even it out with the right. That said, the woman here does draw your eye, and so although it's technically pretty even now, my eye is getting drawn here. It looks to me like what you did is you were shooting in a semi-overcast day, and we're getting a hot spot here on the foreheads, and that's why the color looks off. Her skin tones don't look natural to me. And I think what you did is you pulled down your highlights and maybe you pulled up your shadows to try to even out the lighting on the face. I would definitely go with a more, just because it seems like an overcast day, again, there's gradation to it. Sometimes an overcast day is kind of semi-overcast. You get a hot spot. It can be harsh. I would have chosen to shoot in even light. So just be more aware of your light source. Is it even? Is it a soft light source? Even in an overcast day. I would have found some shade under an overhang, etc. We also have a big hot spot here. So yeah, what it looks like to me is we have a harsh light above coming down, created some hot spots on the top of their heads, and then you try to even it out. Let me know if that is correct. Okay, moving on. So in my last video, actually in the last few videos, I talked about how I am balancing my ambient light with my strobe lighting. But sometimes you actually want to do the opposite. And there's a few ways you can deal with that. So if you have two competing light sources and you're getting a color cast because of one, sometimes your best option is to actually shut out the ambient light. And you can do that by simply raising your shutter speed. So if you're using a flash, your flash exposure will be determined by your ISO and your aperture, but not so much your shutter. And then your ambient light will be determined by your aperture, ISO, and shutter. And so by manipulating the shutter, we are able to change the amount of ambient light we're allowing in. Most cases, I like to balance out those two by having a longer shutter and allowing more ambient light, especially when I'm shooting at night in low lighting. I can really make the environment come to life by doing that. But other times, I am raising my shutter less often in order to shut out the ambient light. Another option, and we don't It wouldn't have worked in this situation because you can confirm this for me. I believe we are dealing with fluorescent lighting. If you're shooting with Canon, and I assume that other brands have followed Canon's lead on this one, back when I started, you had to kind of make your own gels. A gel is basically a piece of film that you're putting over your flash in order to manipulate its color. And in order to balance your flash out with like tungsten light, we had to buy gels and then basically find a way to like MacGyver it onto the strobe. Now, Canon cameras come with something that allow you to do that. It comes with your standard diffusion cap. It has a full I don't know how they distinguish the amount. I think it's like full C. I forgot what the acronym is, but basically full blown help your flash balance for tungsten, and then it has like a half a gel, which is kind of in between the tungsten and like the neutral daylight balance of the flash. I actually don't use it. I don't mind a little bit of a tungsten. I'm usually not trying to neutralize my tungsten light. I found that it produced stale results where when I balanced my flash to the tungsten light. I have a job I can show that to you guys. I'll pull that up maybe in the next few weeks. So I did notice, at least in the files you rated with 5 stars, you do a good job of capturing like the moments, and that's the most important. Here we're a little bit high. It's a little bit overexposed maybe. We do have a lot of light in the back here. I think what we have in this situation is window light coming from behind you, maybe behind your left shoulder, and then we're getting some hot lights here. I don't think you fired a flash. I can look at the metadata. Let me pull that up. Did not fire, so I'm correct. You did not fire a flash. So we have window light behind your shoulder, lighting her, and then you have some hot spots here. So there's nothing you could have done to control them independently because you're not using a flash. But what I would have probably reduced my exposure a touch. You are about a third of a stop to my eye overexposed. You guys can't see the histogram on the right, but I can see it now that I'm looking. And yeah, by looking at the data, I'm able to determine if it's correctly exposed or not. Your histogram is going to be a better gauge than your eye. Your monitor might be turned down. If you're looking at it in the camera, depends on how bright your camera screen is. You can be misled. But data is data, and the best way to determine if an exposure is correct is by using the histogram. Using the histogram isn't there's no such thing as a perfect histogram. You have to analyze. If you have an all white wall, your histogram should be pushed toward the right. If you're photographing a black wall, you would have a lot of data on the left. Not if you want a black wall that isn't black, meaning no data, like no detail. It should be just to the right of the very edge of the left side of the histogram. And the same would go for white. But if you have a chessboard, you should have a big spike on the left and a big spike on the right. So we have to use the data and then our mind to determine if it's properly exposed. We're using both. Okay. So the image I'm on now is a good example of what I was talking about that I noticed. You tend to leave a lot of headroom, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I often do the same, as I mentioned in the last video, because of limited focus points. But on the Z6, you don't have that limitation. So I'm not entirely sure how that's happening. Maybe just in the moment. Maybe it's just a habit. I couldn't say. This is an image where we do have a lot of negative space on the right. I don't think it's doing anything for you. Aesthetically, I would like this kind of a crop, but then you have no space. You're having your subject look off the scene, which is not going to evoke a positive feeling most likely. When we have this type of non-traditional crop, it's traditional in the sense that we have a rule of thirds for the most part, but now we're wondering, what is she looking at? And so if you're going to do this kind of shot, it should be for a reason. So what I probably would have done is maybe come in here. I would have done that. Maybe you left a larger crop. I can speculate because you found this to be more distracting if you cropped in. Maybe it just didn't occur to you to crop your work after the fact. I'm not sure. Yeah, I haven't seen you. Casa de Criso, right? I haven't seen you, I don't think in my live streams yet. Or did I? Yeah, and Alex, I haven't seen you too much either. And you guys are two of the most active people on my channel, I would say. So also about critiques, I use them as opportunities to teach. I don't just, so you guys will see I go on tangents that aren't necessarily like directed at lyric tenor. They're just, I see an opportunity. There is a delay, unfortunately, and so you're not able to comment probably in time when I'm talking about your work. But yeah. I'm guessing you don't own a flash. That's going to be my guess. I don't think any of this was shot with a flash. Yeah, flash did not fire, although I'm not 100% sure that if you're using an external flash, if it will register in the metadata. Another observation I made, and I don't need metadata to see it, but you're mostly shooting wide, and shooting wide has a host of technical, I don't want to call them problems, but I'm not, until I find the right word, there are some issues you're going to face. Like in this image, if you shot this arrangement with a long lens, with a lens hood, you would be able to cut out that big blob of light, and you could create probably a nice rim light on the flowers. But when shooting wide, you're going to be prone to more flare and this sort of a light source here. Whereas if you were shooting with the telephoto, you're able to kind of cut the angle and shoot in a way where you would get a nice rim light without having a distracting hot spot. So if I look at the metadata, we can't really see it. But I can see that your highlights are completely blown out. Now, this is going to be a highlight anyway, and having detail in it might be worse. But ideally, conventionally, in your photography, you don't want blown out highlights or shadows that are too dark where you have no detail. You ideally have some data in your extremes, from your highlights to your blacks. You have some data. In other words, you have some detail. Okay, so you had a flash, you decided not to use it. Yeah, I think that's fine. I totally can see why that would be the best option. Not for this image, though. Not in this particular image. We can see what happens where you're backlit and you're having to completely blow out the background in order to get a proper exposure. Can you confirm, by the way, I don't know if you confirmed if we were dealing with fluorescent lights, but I'm pretty sure we were. But confirm if you can. So here's an example of when we probably could have used flash to create an aesthetically more pleasing version of this image. What we could have done is aim a flash behind us in a corner, bounced it, and then create a cascade of light across, giving more of a tonal range, more depth to the image. It wouldn't look as flat, and then you could raise your shutter in order to shut out this ambient light. What you can also do, if then even raising your shutter, because the shutter will peak, I don't know what it peaks at when you're using a flash with the Z6, probably like 2/50th of a second. But if you're at 2/50th and you still have too much of a blown out background, you could then raise your aperture in order to further cut down on the ambient light. That will just make your flash work harder, but that's okay when we're photographing inanimate objects because we don't need the flash to immediately recycle in order to get another shot like we would if we were photographing people. So let me catch up on comments. The tangents are very helpful. Okay, good. I'm basically doing exactly what I do when I teach in person. I have a flash but decide not to use it. I'm not very comfortable with the flash yet. Enough on events. Yes, I believe the okay, so I'm correct that we are dealing with fluorescent light. And here's the problem with that. You're balancing daylight from large windows, which you probably had at least on like 3/4 of the building. with fluorescent light. And so what's happening is the camera is balancing, I think, for daylight, but it's getting a color cast from the fluorescent light. So perhaps, if you're not able to like cut out that fluorescent light, maybe using a flash could have helped. So again, good moment. I'm not gonna, like, this is the kind of thing I avoid when I'm talking about critiques. I'm not gonna be like, oh, I wish I could see their faces. Like, I can't see their faces because that's not the perspective you had, at the moment it happened. So we have to be reasonable. I don't. Okay, one moment here. Sorry, messages. So there are people on their high horse and they will pick apart something and they're forgetting that, they weren't there and you have limitations as a person. When you see a moment, it's better to capture it imperfectly than to not capture it at all. But again, one thing you could have done is not have so much headspace here. Let me know why you think you might be doing that. Here again, similar situation. I see a better crop, just like the one before. Aesthetically, that would be a more interesting crop. We have people that kind of cascade, that kind of like bounce over. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then land here, and then you have someone here balancing out all that space too. But then we're questioning, what is she looking at? And it's going to make you feel a bit uneasy. On my screen, by the way, when I'm zoomed in, I downloaded the lower res files, not the full res, so these images look great. They look low res, but they're not low res. It's only because of the format I downloaded them in. Again, a little bit high on the headspace. One thing I probably would have done is just really, I think one thing I talk about is how physical I believe photography can be and should be and is for me. For me, I'm ducking, I'm juking around, I'm squatting low to get different perspectives. I'm always trying to get interesting perspectives to make interesting compositions. This is one reason I don't want to do something I don't feel like I can do as well as I could do in my prime for the most part. And that's why I'm concerned about doing this when I'm much, much older. I have a very physical approach to the job, and not being able to do that would concern me. And so I can see myself maybe not doing as many events when I'm much older, or having a team and having younger people work with me, where I'm doing the most important stuff and they're doing the more physical stuff, perhaps. Here's a good moment. Here's where I'm at with it, though. All this space on the left, I think So, finding the right words to talk about it. When I'm photographing these one-off kind of close-up candid moments where I don't have context, I like to go all in and get a pretty tight shot. This negative space is giving me a similar feeling that I get when you crop, like, do this kind of a crop, where I'm left wondering what I'm looking at. Who's she interacting off of? What's going on? But when you have one of those close, candid moments, like something like that, perhaps, I'm not questioning it as much. The image is more about her big smile, her moment, rather than about what she's reacting off of, and that's okay. But, again, we've got to use what we have. No high horse. If you don't own a telephoto to get those close candids, you don't get them. Get better at getting close without being noticed. You got to get more comfortable with getting closer to people, or you don't really focus on those moments. And if you're not going to focus on those close-up candids, which you guys definitely have seen a lot of in my work, I would give more context using the wide angle. If you're not willing to get close, I wouldn't leave so much space on the sides here. I would try to either give context by showing who she's reacting off of by shooting over their shoulder or including them in the crop, or I would try to physically get closer. Let's catch up on comments. Linda says, I need to leave for work conference call. I'll watch a video later. Good stuff. Thanks, Linda. Lyric Tenor, I have no idea about the Headroom. Okay. I think it's a habit, honestly. I wasn't aware of it, but now I am. Yeah, we all have habits, and sometimes it's hard to trace why. There is no reason for them, you know. I have habits that I have bad habits. I overexposed for years and years and years because I learned on film in which it was always better to overexpose. But even when I correct for that overexposure, I found that the color accuracy was a little bit off. So we all have habits. Here we have another one, but I kind of like the banners above. And so here it's working. And again, you caught a great moment. Your standard kind of shooting through people. I do that a lot. I do that with telephoto lenses where I'll completely end up blurring them out. But here you're using, let's take a look at the metadata. It looks at about 50-ish. And it is a... Oh, no, you're at 120 millimeters. So what lens is that? I wonder what you're using. You have a 70 to 200. Okay, I was wrong about your limitations. Again, a lot of headspace. You could argue, though, you wanted to kind of sandwich or layer this image, one with two people interacting and then another two people interacting. Possibly we could have an alternative crop. Maybe here could work, maybe. Just giving you an option. Here again, we have a lot of headspace. A lot. So that's okay if you like it, but just be aware of it. We want everything we do to be a choice, not just arbitrary. So if you are choosing to have a lot of headspace, make sure you're conscious of it and ask yourself, why do I shoot it the way I'm shooting it? I like this image. It's interesting. Shooting through that, the way the sign kind of pulls our eye in toward our subject. All right, let me catch up. We got a comment. Sarah, hey Mick, I only joined because I didn't know you were doing this, but this is really helpful for me. Awesome. Welcome. I do them every day, guys. Every day right now. I'm at 10:15. I'm live streaming, and they're gonna range from when I don't have an idea, or because I think you guys mostly want to see like examples, so you want to see my work. I'm mostly showing you guys a different job every day, but I'm also going to do a critique for my Patreon supporters initially. But I want to do some philosophical geared videos where we talk about just philosophy or my philosophy and get input from you guys. I also want to figure out how to do live streams with other people, conference calls, that kind of thing. So I'm working on all of them. What kind of event was this? Okay, he can answer that for you. Reunion, correct? And Lyric Tenor, seeing the Headroom now. High school homecoming event for a small private high school. Okay. It's not a reunion, though, because they're all older. All right. Sam has a comment. I tend to crop in close because my customers always want the event to look crowded and heavily attended. Okay. That's an interesting point. I'm seeing comments that didn't show up earlier for whatever reason. Where are you from, sir? And I'm not sure who that's geared toward. I'm in Los Angeles, but I don't think you were asking me. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your name, Vibhuti. I think you may have emailed me before. Let me know if I'm correct. If you were asking what I shoot with the 5D Mark III, 7D Mark II. We're looking at work produced on a Nikon Z6. Let's go to this image. In a perfect world, maybe you wouldn't crop at the elbow. Again, we're getting very hot backgrounds. That's the challenge. It's really tough shooting into, and I've done this, recently I had a job where I had a lot of windows, but they had the lights off, which was beneficial. But what happens is you always want your key light to be somewhat over your shoulder or to the side and not to be behind your subject, because then you're having to find ways to cut the angle so that you're not shooting directly into it. And shooting with the telephoto would help with that. But when you're shooting wide-ish or just shooting with the telephoto into that light source, this is what happens. And so our most dominant light source, I'm guessing, is coming from here. We can just tell. Light's coming in and hitting in that direction. I actually think it might be hitting the windows directly. So it's not bouncing around and entering here. It's just hitting here. And we're getting a really, really bright hot spot here. So it was more of like a reunion, not reading your comment. It was more of a reunion, right? Casa says, I often have to crop close later in post to get the crowded feeling. I think I have that headroom problem too, partly because I mostly use 35 or 50 millimeters. And Alex says, Sam Cable. Oh, that is your last name. Looking crowded, yes, I have the same issue, but difficult when a workshop has 200 places, 40 attendees, and they all want to practice social distancing. Yeah. I really, really like this image. I'm going to quibble a bit. She is a little bit out of focus to my eye here. I don't think it's the resolution. You are shooting at f4. So if I am going to shoot at f4, and they are kind of staggered a bit, they're not at an equal focal distance from me, I'll try to find the most optimum point to focus. So that would probably be maybe her shoulder here, or at the far end of this woman. And then you'd get a more or less like evenly focused image, but you probably just focused on her. And if you focus right down the middle, right here, she's too far away. She's too far forward to properly get her properly exposed. So I probably would have gone at least up to 5.6 in order to get that. There's a lot of light here, and I can see it. You're also at a very slow shutter, an 80th, which is fine when they're not moving and you're shooting wide. It's doable. But you're at ISO 2000. Yeah, that's an issue with shooting available light. You're usually in an indoor environment. You're going to have to shoot a little bit at higher ISOs. It looks good, though. I think I would have gone with that crop personally. I think you did a good job with the detail shots. Again, we have to recognize our own weaknesses. Mine is I don't shoot enough detail shots, if anything. I do shoot them. They're important. But I really focus on people. I'm interested in people. I'm not that interested in objects as a photographer in general. It applies to all types of photography I do. It's not just events. If I go out and shoot for myself, I'm usually photographing people. Here we have another example of, I can clearly tell you focused on the woman right here, and you're at f4, and you might have been at f4 because that was the largest aperture you could select. I actually wasn't, so I'm looking. You're using a 24-70 at f2.8, but I'm not suggesting you go down to 2.8 because then for sure that woman would be out of focus. But it looks like you chose f4 in order to allow enough light in because you're shooting at such a high ISO, 2000. And you're already at 100th of a second. You probably don't want to go slower. We have an alternative crop here. If I hit R, I can just crop in there and make it about these three women. I think it works a little bit better aesthetically, compositionally. And then that woman's not as out of focus because she's not in the shot. So that's an option. But of course, you've probably felt guilty about cropping her out. What you could do in that situation is you can always make a duplicate. So I believe you can do it by right-clicking on the image here. I always do it on the bottom of my screen on the file, but you can right click, you can create a duplicate, create virtual copy, and then make on that virtual copy an alternative crop, and then you don't have to worry about like feeling bad about cropping her out. Now in this image, I think it's fine that you left a lot of headroom because we see what they're looking at. It's giving context. This is a really nice image, actually. I like this one quite a bit. If I saw this image happening in front of me, what I would have done is quickly not just focused on her. I would focus on her for one, then focus on her for another, very quickly grab both shots. That requires some skill. It requires your ability to quickly reposition your focus point. Again, some headroom here, but we have a lot of space we can crop. I would have gone here, personally. You have another alternative. You could have cropped like that. I don't like this one as much. It emphasizes that kind of hot spot. Okay, give me a second. I'm going to catch up on comments. And tea. So yeah, the lens is 2.8, was using f4 to try to get more people in focus. I guess it wasn't enough. So there are some rules of thumb you could follow, as well as eventually it becomes intuitive. So much of learning anything is intuitive. You might not know why something's working, but when you shoot a certain way, subconsciously you're recognizing that it's producing good results, and then you shoot that way more. When it comes to groups, rule of thumb, 2.8 is fine for an individual. It can even be fine for two people if they're standing shoulder to shoulder. No one's closer than the other. Anytime I'm doing larger groups than two, I'm usually at f4, and this is again assuming they're more or less, evenly distanced from me. Groups of like 4, 5, 6, then I'm usually going up to 5.6. If I'm doing a table shot, I'm usually at 7.1. About a table shot is when you guys have one half of a table stand up and stand behind the other half. Actually, you wouldn't have exactly one half. You'd have about 60% of the table stand behind 40% of the table for your table shot. That's the kind of shot you definitely will need more depth. Now, the focal length matters as well. If you're shooting wide, you usually have to shoot at a higher amount. It's about relative distance from you. If I'm shooting with the 200 millimeter lens, I can have people staggered a bit more because relative to the lens, they're like all roughly about the same distance from me. But when you're shooting wide, you don't have that latitude. Hopefully that made sense. It does make sense, but to you guys, I hope I'm explaining it clearly. Do you very often crop an image while editing afterwards to get a better composition? Not often. For me personally, not often. I really enjoy getting it right. I would like to think I find a good balance between what matters, which is capturing something that's meaningful, and being technical. So I've said this a few times on my channel. When I started out as a photographer and I was second shooting, the guy I worked with, he told me his opinion was that you have two types of photographer. You have the shoot from the hip creative, and you have the technical photographer, and you're usually one or the other. And I do think that we do tend to gravitate toward one or the other, but I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I don't think if you're technical, I think that the ideal photographer, let me put it this way. The ideal photographer is both. If you want to be creative, you need to understand the technical side of photography in order to make your technique happen, your vision happen. It's not just that. You have to understand how the camera sees. And so that's part of being technical, is getting how the camera sees. And when you understand all that, you're able to make your vision happen. You need both. So for me, though, I enjoy the technical stuff, but I don't think it's like the end-all be-all. I don't think it's the most important, but you have to learn the technical so that it gets out of the way. And to answer your question, I enjoy getting it right. I enjoy mastering the craft so I don't have to crop later. Sometimes, though, I do crop. You know, I see an alternative crop, for example. Yeah, not to hammer in a point, but yeah, again, a lot of headroom. A lot of headroom on top. Here's a good example of when you don't want to crop so tight, because A, it's cropped too tight as it is, but if I hit R to crop in Lightroom and I select an 8:10 aspect ratio, you guys can see how tight that would look. Really like this image. Adjust Lightroom a little bit. Here again, a lot of space on top, but it's being used to really give some context or show that there's a lot happening. I really like this image. You have sort of that rule of threes, not rule of thirds, but you have your group here, and a group here. The direction is all moving up here, so we have tables here, and it leads in there. And even the way this woman's looking, it draws your eye there. So your eye can be drawn not just by leading lines, okay? We tend to follow the human gaze. We look at her and we know she's looking there. So that woman's eye line will draw us to that woman. That woman will draw us here. And so even when you can't see someone's face, you could get a shot of someone from behind. As people, we're able to determine where they're looking and we tend to follow. All right, let me catch up on comments. Do you ever crop an image? I answered that one. Lyric Tenor says, Sarah, I try to get the crop right in the camera and will straighten in post. However, I don't always have time to get it right in the moment, so I will crop for composition. Makes sense about depth and focal distance. Okay, cool. It's a nice moment. Our main light source is behind her, so it ends up giving a pretty flat image. That said, unless you were willing to use a flash and cut out that ambient light a bit, it is what it is, you know? You could try to shoot. I often will try to put my back to my key light, but sometimes you can't. This image reminds me of a day I had in Venice Beach. I shoot there a lot, and there was an older photographer. I mean, he looked like he may have been in his 90s, like mid-90s even. And he had just like this huge rig of digital cameras like around his neck. He had like pouches on his waist and everything. And there I was shooting with like my Rolleiflex or something from like 1954 or whatever it was, you know. It was really interesting. I think a lot of people they're marveled by modern technology, and if you lived with those film cameras, you're like, oh my god, it was a headache, you know, dust was an issue, etc. When you're younger, you see it completely differently. I'm a weird in between person. I learned on film. I returned a few years ago to shooting film for my own work. I'm that in-between generation. I got a cell phone in like 11th grade. I was one of the first people, you know. I like the way the light is framing her here. It's really interesting. So here's a good example. We don't need to see her eyes to know she's looking that way. So if you guys put your hand over the screen to cover her, where would you look? Like, you guys can literally try that. Cover this woman with your hand, and then look at the photograph and tell me where your eye goes. And your eye should be going that way, because we know where she's looking. And as people, you guys know, if you've ever driven on the freeway and everyone's stopping and looking at a crash, you look too. If you're ever at a touristy area and there's a big crowd around a panhandler, you're tempted to see what the commotion is all about. It's a nice image. I think potentially when I do crop, maybe I will do minor tweaks in my own work and just go like full bore rule of thirds. I find that often it's in between shots need to compositionally work well, or else I just go full bore rule of thirds or center my subject. I don't like to like be a little bit off unless there's a very specific reason. I often think older photographers must be veterans who wear the photo stuff like military gear and all the holsters and pouches. I don't know. I don't know about. I see what you're saying though. Really nice shot that's really giving you the scope of the event. It looks busy. It's not boring. I could really spend time watching all the little interactions. I'm thinking if it has to do with your height. I don't know how tall you are, but it might be influencing how you're cropping. It's an interesting one. So I'll shoot through things like flowers a lot with a telephoto, but not so much a wide angle. I think I'll usually use it as a framing device, and it's not quite framing the woman. It's a little weird. I kind of like it, but it's a bit weird. I'd like to hear what people think in the comments. Thank you for the feedback, actually, because I wouldn't have thought of that, where my pointer is. So I can, in the next one, I can add like a little red circle. I've seen people do that. This is new to me, so yeah, I'm going to keep that in mind. It's pretty. There you are. Can you see the pointer? I probably would have color balanced that one correctly. I assume that pamphlet is white. I would have gone for a full rule of thirds here too. So bring it in. Oh, okay. There's a whole other portion where we have a ceremony. Very cool. So, when I have a speaker on stage, so you're pretty tall. I'm not sure why. Yeah, it's just a habit, I suppose. We have a speaker on stage, and what I will do is I really like the wider shot, and we have context. We know people are watching him. I like the way they're staggered between. In this shot, and make it larger, I like the way you have like 1, 2, 3 leading toward him, and here we're creating actually a V among all the people, and you're doing a pretty good job of drawing the eye in toward him. But I would also, and we'll see if you did it, I would also get very tight, typical like shots, a kind of like moment shot of the speaker at a podium. I'll do those really tightly framed. I usually find like a 3/4 kind of view. So I'll be like a 45 degree from the person, not in front, and I'll get that moment. Usually I'll do like a rule of thirds composition for that. I like the framing in this image as well. Sam says, very often I have to keep in mind my vantage point for shots. I will get low. I will stand on chairs to mix up my shots and perspectives. Does anyone else do this? Absolutely. Um, you might not have caught it. I think you joined midway in our live stream. I'm very physical personally about how I do the job. I'm squatting. I'm leaning. I like to work really light and nimble. I wouldn't discourage anyone from doing this, but I think I have, this is going to sound really weird. I'm going to admit that. I think I have a good physique for what I do, meaning I'm pretty slim. I'm pretty average height. Like, I'm not too short. I'm not too tall. Like, I'm able to maneuver very easily. If I were like 6'5" and just like a really big guy, I would actually find it harder to do what I do. I'm able to maneuver through crowds really like delicately. But if you're really tall, you just embrace that. You find a way to use it. If you're really short, you find a way to use it. I was at an event a few months ago, and there was a photographer or videographer, and he was like 5 foot, and he was able to stand in front of everyone without blocking their shot. So it has some advantages. You guys got to give me a second. I think I've been coming down with something, and I'm still doing these live streams every day. It's taking a toll. I don't have a very strong voice as it is. So Sarah says she can't see my pointer. Yeah, I don't want to stop the stream just to figure it out, but going forward, I'm going to, right for now, I'll be more verbal in explaining. But going further, I'll figure out how to adjust that. Or unless someone wants to tell me real quick in the chat, and then if I can quickly do it, I'll take care of it. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully, Sarah, at 10:15. Okay, Casa. Since I'm trying to blend in and stay stealthy, I avoid anything like climbing on stuff or doing gymnastics. I'd probably just cause an accident anyway. Yeah, I personally will only stand on a chair very sparingly. I try to avoid it. But I'll do it if the shot calls for it. I'll quickly jump up, grab the shot, jump down. I make a joke. I used to do that at every wedding I shot. When I shot weddings, I would make a joke about how every time I jump on a chair or a wall with my camera in my hand, I'd be like, oh, I never fall, but this is probably going to be the time I fall. And I say how I say that every time, and I never fall, but this will probably be the time. But I haven't fallen. I haven't fallen yet. I think that's a good image. Just the way we can bounce from, I know you guys can't see my pointer, but person to person to person to person to person, and then you arrive at the woman they're all looking toward. That's really cool. We have alternative crops here. We can come in, just keep it nice and tight like that. That can work. Maybe a little more headspace. I would say that works really well. Really just self-contains the moment by not having us have to think about anything but the moment, because we have such a tight framing. This is the whole world we have in the image. With photography, we're creating little worlds, right? And we can make an image very self-contained by cropping context out. On this image, you already know what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna say that. Hopefully, you know what I'm gonna say. Which will mean I'm doing a good job here. But we have a hot background. Here we're in an area where we have tungsten lights now. A lot of churches, synagogues, I noticed, will have those little round tungsten-like lights at the top. And I think now we're getting an orange color cast that's balancing with the white light. We are cropped pretty high again. We have alternative crops. So I hit R on the keyboard. Shortcut to quickly change my aspect ratio or my... I'm blanking. But if I hit X, I can do a vertical crop rather than horizontal. That could be an option. Maybe there would work. If I hit L, I can do like a light box effect on Lightroom, and I can darken everything that's not in my crop, as you guys can see there. Hit R again, hit L to get rid of it. Okay. Obviously, ideally, we would see his face here, but we don't. That's okay. What I probably would have done is if I spotted that live, I would have quickly taken a few steps to my right. Sometimes I do kind of a, I don't know how to explain it. I don't turn and then start walking forward. I do kind of like a sidestep in order to get into position. Again, very physical, an event photographer. You don't have to be a physical event photographer, but if you want to take it to another level, if you want to think about how good you can potentially be, you have to think about how you move. When it comes to food, I think it's no offense to you, but I think it's ridiculous how we have to photograph the food. I get it. I do it. We need to. But I don't know, if I threw an event, I wouldn't give a damn about the food. I don't need photos of food to look at 5 years later. I'm not going to be like, "Oh yeah, that chicken was amazing," you know. Here I can tell you're a bit slow on your shutter. It's not that you're out of focus, it's that she's in movement. So let's take a look at the metadata. If I hit G on my keyboard, I can go into my library and I can take a look. Actually, you can do it from the develop module at the top too. You're at 125th, which tells me she was probably moving really fast when you fired your shot. You know what I'm going to say here. But you also could have cropped in. That woman's not doing anything. It's not technically terribly out of balance, but I like the angle of the window leading here, and I would have brought the corner toward it, maybe there, or I would completely crop her out. That's an option, but I feel like it's a little heavy on the left, so maybe you have no choice but to add a little bit of that woman. You can just go traditional rule of thirds right there. What I do is I put the, I hope you guys can see the lines of the grid, but it's probably hard to see, but like I would line it up where I put the line, the intersecting lines right between her eyes. Hit enter. Lyric Tenor says, I couldn't get to the position quickly enough. I didn't realize this was going to happen. Yeah, like I said, like, it's easy for me to say, but I also always need to acknowledge that, you know, you're limited. Sometimes you can't get into the position in time. That's going to happen. The more you do the job, the more intuitive it gets, where you're naturally going to start moving into position. You're always going to just intuitively know where you should be to predict a shot. I like that moment. Another good moment. So my take, I'll do a wrap up at the end too, but overall, you have a knack, in my opinion, for the least learnable and most important aspect of being an event photographer, and that is being able to read people. Unless you just shot like crazy and then deleted all the images that you didn't capture the moment in. But based off this body of work, you're capturing moments, and that's what's most important. And that's probably the hardest thing to learn. It is learnable, but I think everyone is going to start at a different position. For me, I've always been really good at reading people. And so that part came very intuitively to me. But then I've also consciously asked, what is it that I'm able to do that's helping me along the way to get these moments? And a lot of it is like predicting smiles. I can tell when they're going to happen. And I asked myself, why can I tell? What am I detecting? It's really micro sort of expressions. A big one is looking at the eyes. If I'm watching people talk, I can see in their eye if they're going to smile, and they always smile on the break, the pause in between sentences. Again, great moments. Crop is a little high again. Beautiful moments. I'm sure they were very happy with the work. Ideally, you would have more shoulder room on the edges. You don't ever want to crop in like that on the person on the left. And again, if you crop at 8x10, you're going to have an even more severe crop. I'm going to show it again in case there are people just joining. So that's what an 8x10 would look like. So if they really liked this image, and Nancy wants to frame it in her 8x10 frame, and she orders a print, it's going to look like that. And she may or may not catch it on the website she ordered the print from if you have that set up for her. You're asking, will that be more intuitive while on a job? What I'm saying is that I think the more you do this, the more intuitive everything will get. And a lot of it will come from repetition. You're not going to really consciously realize you're doing it. You're subconsciously just going to start knowing where to be. That was my experience, at least. You can also consciously think about it too and say, how can I refine my craft? How can I improve? What are some things I can look for to know where to stand, when to stand? A lot of it will be being really in tune with the environment, being very present. If you're in your head, it's really hard to be perceptive. Being perceptive often means lowering your guard or reducing your conscious awareness, so that you're just observing with a blank slate. When you're able to do that, you can really predict things really well. A very hippie way of saying it, and not very articulate, and it can sound a little bit like woo-woo to some people, is follow the energy, but it is real. You can follow the energy of a room when you just let yourself be present. Today's really hard on me for my throat, I'm going to be honest. Let me know if you guys have any other questions too. Very cliche, but I don't have a problem with it. I do it too. But anytime someone pulls out a phone, you can grab that moment. I usually like to grab them, you can do both, of course. That would be ideal. My tendency is to grab the shot of them, sometimes with context of the phone, sometimes without, and I get a cool candid where they're looking off camera. There's a lot you can do when someone pulls out a phone. Cass that says 8x10 looks weird to me. I don't think we really use it here in Europe. 8x10 is still around. I believe headshots are still done in 8x10 if you print them. I'm not 100%. I'll find out. My Pentax 6.7, if you're shooting film, is 8x10 aspect ratio, I believe, right? It depends, but digital cameras aren't shooting with an 8x10 crop. But what I'm saying is that if you, I use SmugMug, and you can disable print sizes, but 8x10 is a standard print size. It's still around. And if someone does go with an 8x10, and you didn't give enough room on the shoulders, it's going to get cropped. You can mitigate that issue if you're offering printing, by not offering 8x10 as an option, but they might ask for it, They still make frames for 8x10. Here's a very traditional standard crop. It's good, If I hit R, it's more or less very close to that rule of thirds with the eye line. Here's our thumbnail. Here's a good example when they're staggered that way. I know you guys can't see my cursor, but when they're staggered this way, you do need to shoot, especially because you're shooting at an angle as well, you need to shoot at a higher aperture. I'm going to guess without looking, it's f4. Let's take a look. It is f4. Yeah, again, you got the cell phone shot. Looks good. I would really encourage you to try to get the moment too, not just a cell phone. Because look, they're all smiling. You get these really cool candid moments of them looking off camera. I love that shot, to get that kind of shot. Here we have a non-traditional crop. Their eye line is like very centered. It's a bit strange. You're cropping a little high again. I like the wide shots of everyone clapping. That's a cool one. This one's weak only in, it's not horrible, don't take it wrong, but like these were really good images, I felt, in the way you were able to zero in on a person, like the woman right here in the middle. I really like. So we have the subject, or the image is about all of these women, but you zeroed in on one. Whereas this one, it's just a little bit weird because the woman you zeroed in on, her arm is cropped. She's crammed all the way onto the left side. It doesn't work as well. Alternative crop, bring it in. Now here, she's positioned all the way at the bottom, but what we have is that we have a play between the two, and they're evenly spaced, and so we can go between the two. It's a nice direction to the image. If I hit R and pull up the crop, I mean, hang on. What we can do is use that point, I hope you guys can see it, and that point as a way of like trying to perfectly, if we want to be like perfectionists, try to perfectly even it out. We're not going to get it like where the eye point is at the eye point unless we really crop in, and so I don't think we should do that, but we can use that middle box as a way of gauging distance between the two. We could do that as well. Your original crop, in my opinion, it's fine. I think that was the best, but I'm always trying to look at different options. I really like that we're given a sense of place by using a detail shot here. So you have some current students. I don't think the people on the left are doing too much for us. I would probably bring it in. Your crop did work, but I really think having a crop like that is quite nice as well. And just make it about these three girls, the current students, I assume. Nice self-contained image. It kind of like circles around here. I like the tones in this image. Okay. We're almost toward the end, and then I'm going to do a quick recap. With these, One thing to always be mindful of when you're doing portraits is we do have some traditional cropping for portraits, like 3/4 shots, etc. Cropping like mid-thigh can work really well. Usually you want the eye line to be 1/3 of the way. We want to avoid really cropping limbs. So 1/3 of the way, or like at the thigh, is fine. But we don't want to crop someone at the wrist. We don't want to crop people's toes or at the ankle. It's a bit weird. If you want to do that, make sure you're doing it for a reason. You can do anything you want, but you should be able to rationalize it. So here, for example, we could probably it's kind of tricky. We could maybe do that, but then we're a little bit claustrophobic. Okay. Good eye to grab that. So earlier I mentioned if I'm going to do a selective focus on text, I'll usually go toward the middle. I mean the beginning. And here you did that. It's a good detail, a good moment. That's beautiful. Beautiful, perfect crop. I really like this one. This one feels a bit off. I'm not entirely sure what the moment is. It's a bit vague. I can see she's looking at her jacket and she's looking back, but clearly defined moments tend to work better. Here, the moment is she's showing off her new pin or her old pins or whatever. I saw they were giving out new ones, or like maybe it's her old jacket. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but it doesn't matter. Like, I get the gist of it. That one's clear. She's, they're all looking, she's observing. It's a cool moment. Here we got a majorly hot spot. That's the window light here. That's our key light in the situation. If you move to the left a bit and cut the angle of the light here and used a telephoto from farther away, you wouldn't have that issue and you'd get a nice rim light on the face. But when you're shooting wide, again, we have the problem of shooting into light. Okay. Traditionally, for formal portraits, and it's what I tend to do, I'm usually using telephotos from a distance. I'm compressing the image and I'm putting them in soft light. By compressing the image, I'm able to remove distracting elements, for example, like trees, that kind of thing. One thing to avoid, we don't have like a really in focus tree, but having it come from like her head a bit is not ideal. You want non-distracting backgrounds, and you want even soft light because it's going to be more flattering, and then it is less work for you. Most importantly for me, I hate editing. So look for the even light. Even light could be under the overhang in this image. You could have used your 70 to 200 at like 200 millimeters, and I bet you could have found some good shots with clean backgrounds. It's a good one. You have a lot happening, and then you have your perfect kind of rule of thirds woman right here. Here we can really see the effect of the hard light, and it's harder than the other image we looked at. So we have a semi-overcast day, and what I'm guessing is the sun peaked out from the clouds. So you were okay. Next shot you took, out here, the sun shifted, well, the clouds shifted, and now we have a really hard light source. And on top of it not being flattering, and you get that like bronze look when you try to recover the highlights, their eyes aren't fully open because it's really bright. So another thing to consider. Okay, we're almost toward the end. Let me know if you guys have questions as I prepare to kind of run down everything. Lessons that we can discuss, like sort of a recap of what I thought of the work, how it could improve, and that kind of thing. But in the meanwhile, let me see some questions so I can kind of prepare that. Some black and white for the end, huh? I'm wondering if it's because of the color, the lighting. Looks tricky, I can tell already. Okay, I'm going to go to the beginning. I'm going to start a slideshow, and we will wrap up with some final thoughts. All right, till you guys have some questions, if you have questions. The biggest takeaway, so first let's talk about what you did well. I think you did a great job overall. I don't know how long you've been doing this, and like I said at the beginning of the stream, you have a good eye for the moments. That's the most difficult to learn and most important, in my opinion. A lot of your ability to read people it comes down to your personality type. I feel like I know how to read people. When people ask me what I do for a living, it's like the Lightroom slideshow's not working. When people ask me what I do for a living, I say I read people. I'm either reading people or building rapport with people very quickly. Those are two very incredibly important traits as a photographer to have. But you can learn them. You can learn to read people. I basically intuitively got it and then thought about it enough so I can explain it to other people that I was teaching. So I figured out naturally that I could read a person and know they were going to smile before they smiled by looking at the eyes, and then when they smiled, I would grab that moment. So I was ahead of the game. I wasn't seeing the smile and then quickly reacting. I was prepared for it. So that's one thing I think you did really well. Like, you seemed, at least in the photos we're looking at, because these are your 5-star photos, you did a good job of that. So most difficult aspect of photography done. But on top of that, let's talk about some of the technical stuff you did well, and then we'll talk about what you didn't do so well, in my opinion. So I think you did a good job of having a very good body of work. It's very editorial. We have the wide shots mixed in with some close-ups. I think you could benefit from a few more close-ups. I think that you can't be afraid to use that telephoto, you have one, or get closer to people. I think that you, again, caught moments really well. The detail shots really gave us a sense of place. It wasn't just random details. Like, the flowers are fine, the food is fine, but you really showed us what this place was like. You shot more details than I would have, which is a good thing. Again, I don't shoot enough, if anything. I guess in my head, I think that the more time I'm spending on details, the fewer shots I'm getting of the important stuff, of like people interacting in the moments. So compositionally, what were some of Your main weakness was that you're leaving a lot of headroom, and we don't know why that is. Sometimes we have habits, and we just have that habit, and it's random. There's no reason we have it. Maybe you're focusing on overall composition rather than the position of the subject. When you're looking at your subjects, we have some traditions we can follow as a guideline. And when we break them, we want to break them for a reason. So rule of thirds doesn't have to mean like subject placement only. It could be your eye line. So usually having your subject's eye line, like here, this woman's eye line is 1/3 of the way. The woman on the bottom right, if you guys can see it. We have traditional crops when it comes to formal portraits that we typically want to follow. We're not like, remember, we're creating for someone else. We're not like creating our own body of artwork. And so there's nothing wrong with following those traditions and then mix them in with your own creative like vision. That's fine. But if someone hired you to photograph their wedding, you probably don't want to crop all the formals at the chest. We want to follow those traditions. When it comes to the lighting, you did a good job for the type of lighting you had and for not using a flash. But there are going to be a lot of challenges shooting the way you chose to shoot. Shooting wide into big light sources when the light source behind the subject is your key light is a problem. You typically want the key light to be behind you, to the side of you. What we have are, sometimes it doesn't bother me. Like sometimes it's fine. Like this image here, we have a lot of hot spots, but because the moment is so well captured, it doesn't distract too much. But imagine if these windows weren't completely white. The solution to that is shooting with telephotos and cutting the angle, because you have a smaller window of composition, a smaller field of view, where you can shoot in ways where you're basically in camera cropping out all the hot spots. The other option is that you can shoot with a flash and then you can cut out a lot of that ambient light. We talked a lot on my channel about balancing ambient light with your key light with your flashlight, right? But sometimes we want to actually cut that out. Here's a really beautiful image where I'm guessing the key light was actually more to the right. So you had a window to the right, and these windows were comparatively receiving less light, and so they're not as blown out. Again, great moment, great coverage. The two big takeaways I would hope you could, I would encourage you to like get out of this would be: one, your cropping tendency to crop with a lot of headroom, and two, get more comfortable with your flash, and I'll add a third actually, and three, try different focal lengths. See how they work, see what the results are. There are strengths and weaknesses to all. I guess that's all I have for now. I hope that was helpful to you. Let me know in the comment. I'm going to quickly scroll through all the work. If anyone has any last questions, let me know. And when I get to the bottom, we'll wrap it up at that. Okay, I want to thank everyone for watching. I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate your support, and again, thank you for watching. I will continue to do these every day. I might do it indefinitely, and I'm looking forward to them every day, honestly, because every day I get to wake up, I get to do something productive, I get to help people ideally. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.